It began with smoke, not from the chimneys of factories or the fires of war, but from opium pipes. In the early 18s, China stood as one of the world's great civilizations, proud of its ancient culture, art, and power. It saw itself as the Middle Kingdom, the center of the universe, rich with silk, porcelain, tea, and tradition. But beyond its coasts, the world was changing, industries were rising, empires expanding, and colonial ambition was sweeping across continents like wildfire. Europe, especially Britain, needed goods, and China had them. But China didn't need much in return. This imbalance triggered the beginning of a century that would nearly destroy it. Britain found the answer in addiction. With opium grown in British-ruled India, it began trading the drug for Chinese tea and silver. Millions of Chinese people became addicted. Opium flooded the empire, and as the drug poisoned bodies, it also poisoned trust in the ruling Qing Dynasty. The Chinese government, alarmed by the social decay, cracked down, destroying shipments of British opium. But this act of defiance was not tolerated. In 1839, Britain responded with military force. The First Opium War began a clash between an industrial empire with steam-powered gunboats and a declining dynasty stuck in the past. The war was short. The result was humiliating. The Qing were forced to sign the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842, the first of many unequal treaties. China ceded Hong Kong to the British, paid huge reparations, and opened up several ports to foreign control. Other Western powers saw opportunity and followed suit. The French, Russians, Germans, and Japanese each carved out spheres of influence. China was being dismantled economically, politically, spiritually. This period became known as the Century of Humiliation, and it was only beginning. In the decades that followed, China would be consumed by rebellion and foreign domination. One of the most devastating uprisings in world history unfolded between 1850 and 1864, the Taiping Rebellion. Led by a man who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ, it wasn't just a civil war, it was a religious and social revolution that cost more than 20 million lives. Cities burned. Famine spread. The Qing government barely survived, propped up by foreign powers who feared chaos more than reform. China was being bled dry. Then came the Boxer Rebellion at the turn of the century, a desperate and violent attempt to drive out all foreigners and restore China's dignity. The rebels, called Boxers, targeted missionaries, diplomats, and Chinese Christians. But instead of liberation, the movement provoked an international invasion. 8 foreign powers joined forces, stormed Beijing, and crushed the uprising. The Qing were forced to pay even more indemnities, and foreign troops marched through the heart of the Forbidden City. The humiliation was complete. By the early 19s, it was clear to many Chinese intellectuals, students, and revolutionaries that the old system had to fall. The Qing dynasty was corrupt, outdated, and weak. In 1911, revolution finally erupted. The last emperor, just a child, was overthrown. And in 1912, the Republic of China was born. Sun Yat-sen, a visionary reformer educated in the West, became its first provisional president. He dreamed of a modern, united China built on nationalism, democracy, and livelihood. But China was too broken, too divided. Warlords soon controlled much of the country, fighting each other like medieval kings. The dream of a strong, modern republic faded as the new government struggled to survive. Foreign powers remained entrenched. Japan, already an empire on the rise, saw its chance and seized it. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria in northeastern China, establishing a puppet state called Manchukuo. The world did little to stop it. Then, in 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. The Second Sino-Japanese War had begun, an 8-year nightmare of brutality, occupation, and death. The most infamous episode occurred in Nanjing, where Japanese troops murdered, raped, and burned their way through the city. Estimates say over 300,000 civilians and prisoners were killed. The rape of Nanjing became a symbol of China's suffering and Japan's cruelty. But the war also gave rise to unexpected unity. The two opposing Chinese factions, the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek and the communists under Mao Zedong, briefly united against Japan. Their alliance was shaky, but necessary. With American and Soviet support, China fought bravely. When World War II ended in 1945, the Chinese people hoped for peace. They didn't get it. Mao's China was revolutionary but also turbulent. At first, the focus was on land reform. The Communist Party seized property from landlords and redistributed it to peasants. It was a bloody process. Hundreds of thousands were executed. But Mao believed China could skip capitalism and leap directly into socialism. His method was called the Great Leap Forward. Launched in 1958, the Great Leap aimed to turn China into an industrial superpower overnight. Villages melted down metal in backyard furnaces. Communes were formed. The plan was ambitious but fatally flawed. Crops failed. False reports of harvests misled planners. Famine swept the countryside. Estimates say between 30 and 45 million people died, one of the worst man-made disasters in human history. But Mao did not back down. In 1966, he launched the Cultural Revolution, a 10-year campaign to destroy the four olds: old customs, culture, habits, and ideas. Red Guards, made up of radicalized youth, roamed the streets, denouncing teachers, destroying temples, humiliating intellectuals. The country descended into chaos. Even high-ranking party officials were imprisoned or purged. Mao's cult of personality reached godlike proportions. But when he died in 1976, China was exhausted, broken, and ready for change. And change came in the form of Deng Xiaoping. Deng was different. He had suffered during the Cultural Revolution, purged more than once, but he survived. And when he emerged as leader in 1978, he did something revolutionary. He abandoned ideological purity in favor of practical results. "It doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white," he said, "as long as it catches mice." Deng opened China's economy. He allowed market reforms, invited foreign investment, and created special economic zones like Shenzhen. Capitalism grew within the shell of communism. Millions were lifted out of poverty. Factories sprouted. Trade exploded. Cities transformed. Deng's reforms laid the foundation for China's modern miracle. But even as the economy surged, political control remained tight. In 1989, students gathered in Tiananmen Square demanding democracy. For weeks, they occupied the square, building a Statue of Liberty, waving banners, and singing songs. But on the 4th of June, the tanks came. Soldiers opened fire. Hundreds, possibly thousands, were killed. The world watched in horror. The Chinese government silenced it. To this day, the event is censored inside China. Still, the country kept moving forward. In the 19s and 20s, under leaders like Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, China became the world's manufacturing powerhouse. Roads, rails, airports, and ports were built at a dizzying pace. Beijing hosted the 2008 Olympics, announcing to the world that China was back. And it wasn't just back, it was rising. By the early 21st century, China was no longer simply catching up, it was starting to lead. The skyline of Shanghai rivaled New York. Shenzhen, once a small fishing village, had become a mega metropolis of glass and steel. Bullet trains connected cities across thousands of miles in record time. Foreign companies rushed to China not only for cheap labor, but for access to its colossal market. The West had once aimed to change China through capitalism, but instead, capitalism had changed to fit China. But beneath the shimmering towers and surging GDP, the Communist Party still held tight control. Every reform, every investment, every success had to be managed within the structure of party authority. There was no multi-party system, no freedom of the press, no independent judiciary. The government declared stability as the highest goal and used every tool to enforce it. In 2012, a new leader took the helm, Xi Jinping. His rise marked the beginning of a new chapter. Xi presented himself as both a modernizer and a defender of China's national dignity. He spoke of the Chinese dream, a vision of national rejuvenation. His message was clear. The time of humiliation was over. China was no longer standing up, it was rising to reclaim its place in the world. Under Xi's rule, power became more centralized than at any time since Mao. He purged political rivals through a sweeping anti-corruption campaign that also strengthened his own position. He ended the two-term limit for presidents, paving the way to rule indefinitely. And at the heart of his mission was the Communist Party, not as a relic of the past, but as the engine of China's future. Economically, the country continued to boom. It launched ambitious initiatives, like the Made in China 2025 plan, intended to move the country beyond low-cost manufacturing into high-tech innovation. In sectors like AI, robotics, biotechnology, and quantum computing, China poured in money and talent. It built some of the world's fastest supercomputers, launched its own space missions, and led in 5-gram technology. Chinese companies like Huawei, Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance became global players. TikTok, created in Beijing, captivated youth across the globe. Chinese innovation was no longer a copy it was leading, but with growth came new tensions, especially with the United States. As China gained global influence, the U.S. began to see it as a strategic rival. Trade wars erupted. The Trump administration imposed tariffs on Chinese goods. China retaliated. Behind the economic clash was something deeper, a battle of systems. One represented liberal democracy and capitalism. The other, authoritarian capitalism fused with state power. In 2013, Xi launched the Belt and Road Initiative, a global infrastructure strategy that would stretch across Asia, Europe, and Africa. Roads, railways, ports, and pipelines would be built with Chinese money, by Chinese companies, often staffed by Chinese workers. To supporters, it was a modern Silk Road, a vision of win-win cooperation. To critics, it was debt diplomacy, a means of spreading influence through loans that smaller nations could not repay. At the same time, China's military began to expand. It built artificial islands in the South China Sea, claiming territory through construction, concrete, and force. U.S. naval patrols challenged those claims. Military standoffs increased. In Taiwan, fears grew over a potential invasion. China declared that unification was inevitable. The U.S., though not officially allied with Taiwan, was bound by law to help it defend itself. The rivalry deepened. In Washington, policymakers debated how to confront Beijing. Words like decoupling, containment, and Cold War became common. In Beijing, the narrative was clear. China was being encircled, threatened, and bullied by a declining power afraid of its rise. Nationalism surged on both sides. But not all of China's challenges came from abroad. Inside its borders, it faced enormous tests of its own making. One of the darkest chapters emerged in Xinjiang, a region home to the Uyghur Muslim minority. Under the name of counterterrorism, China launched an intense campaign of surveillance and re-education. Reports and satellite images revealed a vast network of detention camps. Uyghurs were allegedly being detained, indoctrinated, and in some cases sterilized or separated from their families. China denied abuse, calling the camps vocational training centers. But the international community raised alarms, with some accusing Beijing of cultural genocide. The Chinese government, unmoved, intensified censorship and control. Meanwhile, Hong Kong, once promised autonomy under the one country, two systems model, erupted in protest in 2019. Millions marched in the streets demanding freedom, democracy, and protection from Beijing's tightening grip. The world watched as tear gas filled the streets and umbrellas became symbols of resistance. In 2020, Beijing imposed a sweeping national security law that effectively ended Hong Kong's autonomy. Activists were jailed, newspapers shut down, and democracy dismantled. For many, it marked the death of two systems. And then came the pandemic. In late 2019, a mysterious virus began spreading in the city of Wuhan. The Chinese government initially suppressed news of the outbreak. Whistleblowers were silenced. But the virus could not be contained. As COVID-19 spread globally, China locked down entire cities, imposed mass testing, and tracked citizens with extraordinary precision. The measures were harsh but effective. While Western nations struggled to contain the virus, China's economy rebounded. Factories restarted. Exports surged. Yet the damage was done. Many around the world blamed China for the initial outbreak. Mistrust grew. The pandemic exposed just how interconnected and fragile the global system had become and how central China was to it. Despite criticism, China emerged from COVID stronger than many expected. It accelerated investment in key technologies, strengthened ties with countries sidelined by the West, and pushed forward its vision of a multipolar world, one no longer dominated by America alone. But China's path forward is not without uncertainty. It faces an aging population and shrinking birth rates. The property market, long a driver of growth, now wobbles under debt. Censorship remains tight. Political dissent is nearly non-existent. Innovation thrives, but always under surveillance. Trust in the West continues to erode, and many nations are growing wary of depending on a country where information is controlled and power centralized. Yet China is not merely a government or a party. It is 1.4 billion people. People who work, struggle, dream, and endure. For many Chinese citizens, the rise of their nation is a source of genuine pride. Their parents walk dirt roads, now they ride bullet trains. Their grandparents starve, now they stream movies, order food with a tap, and fly across continents. For them, China's rise is not a threat, it's a miracle. And so the world stands at a crossroads. Is China a threat to global freedom, or a model of stability in a chaotic world? Will it reshape the international order, or crash under its own contradictions? Can the West adapt to a world where China is not a junior partner, but a peer or even a leader? History offers no easy answers, but it does offer context. The China of today was born in humiliation and raised through struggle. It was forged in revolution, famine, blood, and reform. It rose not because the world helped it, but because it refused to remain broken. It climbed through ashes and censorship, through steel and silicon, through pain and ambition, from the opium fields of the 18s to the data centers of the 21st century. China has transformed itself into a superpower, not by copying the West, but by creating something uniquely its own, powerful, ambitious, flawed, unstoppable. The story isn't over. The battle between openness and control, between individual rights and collective strength, between tradition and transformation, it continues. It is not just China's story. It is our story. Because the world that China is helping shape is the world we all must live in. And in that world, the dragon is not sleeping anymore. It's wide awake and still rising. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to a side of history you never saw before, then don't let it end here. Like the video to show your support. Share it with someone who needs to understand the world a little better. Drop a comment, we read them all, and your voice matters. And if you want more history brought to life like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. Together, we're not just watching history, we're understanding it.